Once upon a time in the quiet village of Umunachi, lived a poor orphan girl named Sarah Chidden. She was only 7 years old when tragedy changed her life. Her mother died from a lingering illness, and 2 years later, her father, her only shield, was killed in a road accident. With nowhere else to go, Sarah was taken in by her stepmother, Mama Felicia, a bitter woman who had always viewed Sarah as a living reminder of her husband's first love. Though she offered Sarah food and shelter, it came at a heavy price: labor, insults, and endless cruelty. Sarah became the house help in her own home. She washed clothes, fetched water, cleaned, and cooked for her stepmother and her 2 children, Kimi, who was 20 and proud, and Tunde, 14, who mimicked his mother's meanness. Sarah never complained. Even when they left her scraps of food or denied her education, she held on to a faint hope that life could one day be better. But the worst betrayal came when Sarah turned 17. One dry Thursday morning, while Sarah was sweeping the compound, she overheard whispers near the gate. Her stepmother was speaking to a richly dressed woman from Lagos. "She's obedient and strong. No parents, no ties. You'll like her," Mama Felicia said. The woman, who introduced herself as Madame Abir, nodded slowly and handed Mama Felicia an envelope. Sarah's fate was sealed. That very evening, Sarah was handed a small nylon bag containing her only clothes, and without a word of goodbye, shoved into a bus heading to Lagos. She cried silently through the long ride, wondering what she had done to deserve a life so harsh. When Sarah stepped out of the bus in Lagos, she was overwhelmed. Skyscrapers loomed above her, bright lights flashed in every direction, and the air smelled of smoke and fried food. She followed Madame Abir into a black SUV and was driven to a sprawling mansion in Lekki Phase 1. There, she was handed over to Mrs. Adana Okoye, a tall, graceful woman with sad eyes and the aura of wealth. She was the CEO of a luxury clothing brand and one of the most respected women in the city. Sarah didn't understand why such a powerful woman would need a maid. But she asked no questions. She was given a room in the servant quarters and told to clean, cook, and keep quiet. Madame Adana barely spoke to her. She only gave instructions through the elderly housekeeper, Mama Bola. "Madam doesn't like noise or nonsense," Mama Bola warned. So Sarah obeyed, quietly going about her chores. But over the weeks, she noticed something strange. Every time Madame Adana looked at her, her expression would shift. Sometimes she froze mid-sentence. Sometimes she would stare at Sarah as though seeing a ghost. Then one day, while cleaning the hallway, Sarah found an old photo frame on the floor. The frame had cracked, and the photo inside showed a baby wrapped in a patterned cloth, the exact same cloth Sarah had kept since childhood. It was the only item her late mother had left behind for her father. Her hands trembled. Could it be a coincidence? She dared to ask Mama Bola, "Who is this baby?" But Mama Bola's eyes narrowed, and she quickly snatched the frame from Sarah's hands. "Don't ask questions that don't concern you." The next week, Adana summoned Sarah to the living room. "You'll be going to the hospital tomorrow. Don't ask why. Just do as I say." Sarah was terrified. She wondered if she had done something wrong. At the hospital, the nurses collected her blood, hair, and cheek swabs. She returned to the mansion, confused and afraid. Days turned into weeks. Life returned to routine, but Sarah noticed Madame Adana was now watching her even more intently. There were tears in the older woman's eyes when she thought Sarah wasn't looking. Then, one quiet night, Madame Adana called her into the private study. There, on the desk, was a brown envelope with a red seal. "Sit," Madame Adana said softly. She opened the envelope and pulled out a white sheet of paper. Her hands trembled as she read. You're my daughter, Sarah." Sarah blinked. "Your real name is Sarah Adonaiah Okoye. You were born 17 years ago at St. Jude's Hospital. I was told you died during childbirth. But it was a lie. The midwife, my co-wife's cousin, stole you. Your father had just died. They wanted to erase me from the picture." Mama Adana's voice cracked. "They gave you to someone who gave you to someone else. And you ended up back in my house. The girl I've been looking for all my life was scrubbing my floors." Sarah broke into tears. So did Madame Adana. Weeks later, Madame Adana and Sarah traveled back to Umunachi. They arrived in a gleaming SUV. When they entered the village, the same people who once mocked Sarah now stared in awe. Mama Felicia, Sarah's stepmother, came out in a faded wrapper, frowning. "What are you doing here with that woman?" she snapped. But Madame Adana stepped forward. "I'm the woman who raised Sarah. The woman you stole her from. You sold my blood. My daughter." The villagers gasped. Mama Felicia dropped to her knees, stammering. "I didn't know. I was told she had no family." "You knew," Sarah shouted, for the first time finding her voice. "You hated me for being loved by a father you didn't respect." Felicia sobbed, trembling. But there was no comfort. The village chief stepped in and declared her a disgrace. Sarah and Adana returned to Lagos the next morning. Back in the city, Sarah began school, dressed in her own uniform for the first time. She took English and business classes, learned how to sew and design, and started working at her mother's fashion company. Years passed. At 21, Sarah launched a fashion line called Legacy Dust, inspired by her village roots. At 23, she opened a school for underprivileged girls. She never forgot where she came from, but she never allowed it to define her again. On her 25th birthday, Sarah stood at a gala event surrounded by friends, mentors, and press. She gave a short speech, holding her mother's hand. "They tried to erase me. But fate rewrote the story. I wasn't born to scrub floors, I was born to build empires." Moral of the story: blood speaks louder than lies. And destiny, no matter how delayed, will always find its way. Kindly subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories waiting for you ahead.